as you know, the current controversy around the film The Innocent of Muslims manifests itself in violent demonstration and counter-demonstration basically all around the world. Brought a debate into the open that has kept academics, policymakers, and security officials busy for some years. How to respond to terrorism and how to respond to ideologies of hate. Now, many strategies have been suggested on how to do that, how to combat these ideologies of hate, and how to win their hearts and minds, however you want to define there. And in this talk, I'd like to shed some light on the main conceptual issues around this question, commenting on modern mass media, i.e. television, radio, print press first, before discussing the dissemination of such ideologies of hate in the so-called postmodern media, i.e. internet, YouTube, Twitter, Skype, and these things, which seems, in my opinion, to be the more pressing issue. And I'll conclude with basically suggesting that responding may not be as urgent or as necessary as it might look at first glance. But let me start with some more general comments on terrorism. I'm sure you're aware that the concept of terrorism is a very contested one. And our former director of the CSTPV, Professor Schmidt, came up with more than 100 different definitions on what that actually is. Now, I'm not going to throw some of them at you. It's just to tell you that, interestingly, many of these definitions point at the fact that terrorism aims to reach an audience. For example, if you take a look what Mark Juergensmeyer writes, he says, without being noticed, in fact, terrorism would not exist. The sheer act of killing does not create a terrorist act. Murders and willful assault occur with such a frequency in most societies that they are scarcely reported in the news media. What makes an act terrorism is that it terrifies. The acts to which we assign that label are deliberate events, bombings and attacks performed at such places and times that they are calculated to be observed. Terrorism without its horrified witnesses would be as pointless as a play without an audience. Hence, Brian Jenkins and other scholars on terrorism usually point out that terrorism is theater. Now, however, terrorism as such forms only a very visible tip of the extremist iceberg. As you know, there are those who do what's now called aiding and abetting terrorism, for example, by helping terrorist groups to recruit new members, by radicalizing individuals who are susceptible to their message or their cause, however defined. Including such preachers of hate in a rather expansive definition of terrorism, a definition that also covers such fuzzy concepts as radicalism and extremism, by the way, raises many a moral and conceptual question. Nevertheless, most Western countries have laws in place criminalizing such acts, and in my opinion, quite rightly so. Take a look at the case of Abu Hamza al-Masri in the United Kingdom, or at Metin Kaplan, the so-called Caliph of Cologne in Germany. These cases demonstrate that individuals like them play a very crucial role in disseminating the terrorist message and in winning over new recruits. And if you take a look at the controversial film The Innocent of Muslims, that actually shows that modern preachers of hate actually do not necessarily be there directly in the flesh and physically reach an audience. Modern ways of communication like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or Skype, in my case, can be used for such purposes as well, with the effect basically being the same. So Salah Beltaqui of the Muslim Council of Scotland, for example, noted on the occasion of a peaceful rally against this horrible movie in Glasgow on 29th of September that it is giving fuel to those who hate Muslims for some reason to go on and do some silly activities. We've had many attacks on mosques and things, especially after an event like this and a publication like this. So let me repeat again, terrorism is primarily a communication strategy that depends on getting through to a target audience, which includes the terrorist supporters and members in order to increase the morale, a broader constituency sympathetic with the terrorists in order to win over new recruits, the wider international audience in order to attract attention and sympathy for their cause, and finally the self-defined enemy in order to intimidate this enemy and to spread fear. Hence, disrupting the terrorist communication channels and denying them access to public space and public debate seems to be a very good idea indeed. In the context of the United Kingdom and the IRA, Maggie Thatcher once famously demanded to starve them of the oxygen of public attention for this very reason, adding that in order to protect democracy, you sometimes have no choice but to use undemocratic means. Whether this is right or wrong, that's up to you to decide. I'm not talking about this question today. Let's just say that Maggie Thatcher's rather unsuccessful attempt to muzzle the press leads us to the following three ideal type models on how modern mass media could deal with terrorism and, by extension, with preachers of hate in general. Firstly, we could adopt a laissez-faire approach that basically allows the media to cover terrorist events when and how they want it, free of any code of conduct. This is very obviously not ideal, as it allows for unscrupulous and irresponsible coverage. With one example I found of the Daily Mail, who brought a header on the 4th July of 2008 in the context of the Glasgow airport attack, which stated in bold letters, "I kicked burning terrorists in balls." Well, that somehow violates the British conduct of fair play, but in any case, it's what I would call responsible coverage of a terrorist event. The second option would be introducing some form of regulation or censorship to control the way that the media covers terrorist events, as Maggie Thatcher actually tried to do. And that's also not very satisfactory, since it undermines democratic values which we are standing for example, the right of free press, the right of free speech. Hence, we should not even contemplate this course of action. Which means, thirdly, a more suitable option would be a system of voluntary self-constraint on the part of the media. This voluntary self-restraint includes the choice not to cover an incident, if this is possible at all, or to embargo it for a certain amount of time in order not to interfere with police operations. Well, if you take a look at recent controversies around the revealing pictures of Prince Harry, followed by the more revealing picture of the Duchess of Cambridge, that demonstrates that voluntary self-restraint seems to work for a while, at least in the British context. And here we should also note that the first deployment of Prince Harry, or Captain Wales as he is officially known, to Afghanistan was also kept under wraps for quite a while, until an Australian magazine broke the news and everybody followed suit. And furthermore, in the case of the Scottish NGO worker Linda Norgrove, who was kidnapped by the Taliban in 2010, the press chose not to cover the story and to keep it out of the public space for fear that reporting it would endanger negotiations and thus the life of the hostage. Only when it was clear that the unfortunate NGO volunteer had been killed in a post-rescue attack and that the next of kin already had been informed, only then the press went ahead and covered the event. Now, voluntary self-restraint could also simply mean adopting certain guidelines for responsible coverage of a terrorist event, or by extension, an incident where a preacher of hate attempts to fan the flames of hate. A list of criteria for such a responsible coverage was developed by Alex Schmidt, that I already mentioned, and this list includes no reliance on terrorists, or authorities for that matter, at sole sources, balance the volumes of news in the incident so that other news of the day will not be crowded out, provide context, perspective, background, possible motivations of the terrorists and causes of the incident, and do not disclose police or rescue plans, do not use inflammatory catchwords or report rumors, protect the lives of hostages by withholding their identity if disclosure will result in harm, involve top management in tough decisions about coverage, do not participate in incidents or serve as negotiators, things that happened in the 17th quite often in the case of airliner hijackings, and respect the privacy of hostages and their families. Don't camp on their lawn just to get a new soundbite. Here, modern media can use its so-called gatekeeper role to influence whether the story is published at all, and if it's published, how it's received and then discussed in the public space. providing context and background, avoiding inflammatory words or pictures, plus airing the opinions of the various stakeholders, including the aggrieved parties, helps to ensure a neutral reporting along the famous sine ira et studio approach of Tacitus, and opens the door to a counter-narrative challenging the terrorists or the preachers of hate's message. Well, mission accomplished then, or not? Well, unfortunately, the answer to that is a resounding no. In the era of global mass media on the one hand and postmodern media on the other, the mission is not accomplishable at all, in my opinion. First of all, as I already noted, in a time of 24/7, 365 media coverage, it's more than unlikely that all major media outlets will subscribe to this voluntary self-restraint. For example, The Sun, the British tabloid The Sun, demonstrated by the publication of Prince Harry's pictures that this is enforceable even within the borders of the United Kingdom. So how then enforcing this outside of the UK's borders, or extending it to non-Western global media outlets such as Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya, who have their own narratives on that? But even more ominously, in the era of postmodern media and the internet, defined by YouTube, Twitter or Facebook, today's terrorists are no longer restricted to just being the object of breaking news. Instead, modern terrorists are able to interact with the outside world in a way that traditional media, as the gatekeepers of the information flow, never ever offered. In a sense, the internet is blurring the line between newsmakers, i.e. those providing the newsworthy event, and news breakers, i.e. those reporting the event. Thus, even if the traditional modern mass media as the gatekeeper is slow to react, or reluctant to react at all, today's terrorists can use the internet to broadcast their own news in real time if need be and unfiltered. Writes Philip Bobbitt, it took decades for Muslims in Africa and Asia to get upset about the plights of Arab Palestinians. Now Muslims react to events in Lebanon, Gaza and Iraq, while the events are underway in real time. It also brings me to note that the plight of the Rohingyas, the Muslims in Burma, escaped the public attention of the Muslim world until very recently, until Al Jazeera covered that, and covered actually their problems and how they are suppressed by the Burmese Muslims. Suddenly we have an audience, and suddenly we have threats aired by the Taliban in Afghanistan and by Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia against the Burmese government. So you can see what global media can actually do. Well, in a nutshell, that means that the news are out there, whether we like it or not, for anybody interested to see. As a result, the traditional approaches to deal with terrorist events or ideologies of hate do not work as well as they could have worked before, at least in theory, before the advent of the internet. New strategies to deal with terrorism and new strategies to reporting it on the internet on one hand, and with extremism nurtured by ideologies of hate also via the internet on the other, obviously need to be developed. Now here, in the following minutes, I will focus, for brevity's sake, just on responding to terrorist propaganda and radicalization on the internet. I assume you have my paper already, so read the other stuff at your leisure. Now, it's a moot point whether the material placed on the internet by terrorist groups ought to be responded at all. I'm not of the opinion, actually, but I'll come to that a little later. Particularly terrorist websites contain political information with no much in the way of incitement to violence. There is actually a good case that trying to remove such sites would, apart from being a violation of the freedom of speech, a propaganda own goal in its own right. Where terrorist material has potentially dangerous characteristics, for example, incitement of hate or information on how to build a bomb, the states do sometimes try to find ways to removing it. However, actually, that's generally easier said than done. For example, it's well known that European countries have a narrower interpretation of what is protected by the freedom of speech than does the United States. A telling case would be that Germany, Austria and other European states outlaw the use of language and symbols expressing support for Nazism, while the United States does not. And perhaps unsurprisingly, European countries in turn protect a far wider variety of speech than, say, Middle Eastern countries, Russia or China. Russia, for example, has long been trying to get removal of the website Caucasus Center, which is maintained by Islamist Chechen rebels. The site has generally been hosted in Scandinavian countries, although admittedly it had to move from server to server in order to stay open. This relates to the difficulty of determining whether the Russian request be interpreted as an attempt to stifle political dissent, or whether it is a legitimate concern over a terrorist website. You know, who is a terrorist lies in the eye of the beholder. Countries have responded to this predicament in very different ways. In some, such as China and Saudi Arabia, relatively efficient filtering systems are in place. Content that the regime does not want is simply removed as it enters a relatively small number of monitored points of connection between the national and global computer networks, and is then not accessible at all within the country. Of course, the efficiency of filtering systems depends very much on the efficiency of the humans who tell the computers what to filter for. For example, I found it very funny, one of my colleagues who works on e-jihad, or electronic jihad, has been informed that filtering against pornography in Saudi Arabia can be circumvented simply by searching languages other than Arabic or English. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he said, many Saudi men have acquired an extensive erotic vocabulary in languages such as French, Italian, and believe it or not, even German. In the European Union and in North America, filtering is increasingly used against materials such as child porn, primarily because decisions to remove such content are rarely contested in court and usually also find general approval. However, there has also been equally general unwillingness to take matters further due to fears of internet censorship, and several laws aiming at that, for example, the Stop Online Piracy or SOPA Act in the United States, have fallen by the wayside in the meantime for this very reason. Hence, in recent years, many Western countries have increasingly turned to a non-legislative approach, urging hosts to voluntarily remove material which violates codes of conduct rather than resort to legal measures. An example of that would be the European Union's recent Clean IT initiative. Despite insisting that much of the terrorist content available on the internet is specifically illegal, this strategy proposes addressing the issue by means of having a variety of stakeholders identify general principles and best practices and start a permanent public-private dialogue rather than by specific legal sanctions or technical attempts at web filtering. Now, apart from removing contents from servers, and with respect to the notion of radicalization on the internet, there has also been quite an extensive interest in the possibility of using the internet as a medium for disseminating a counter-narrative with the aim of disrupting and mitigating the supposed effects of violent extremist discourse online. For example, in 2010, the National Counterterrorism Coordinator of the Netherlands published an edited volume on countering violent extremist narratives, while in January 2011, the United Nations Counterterrorism Implementation Task Force held a conference in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, on the subject of use of the internet to counter the appeal of extremist violence. And in the United Kingdom, we have a dedicated unit of the Home Office, the so-called Research Information Communication Unit, or RICU, that has been established with a similar purpose in mind. Now, if we leave aside normative concerns about whether governments ought to be playing a role in, well, in effect, telling people what to think, there is very little evidence at the present to determine whether online counter-narratives actually work. Actually, there is a good possibility that they may even be counterproductive. In trying to develop strategies for counter-narratives online, governments usually find themselves at the horns of a dilemma. One option is to go online in an official capacity in order to respond directly to the competition. In that case, given that the people the government is trying to reach are almost by definition unlikely to consider the government a credible source, the effectiveness of this approach seems to be quite limited. An example of this difficulty is provided by the case of the US Department of State's Digital Outreach Team. This special multilingual unit is dedicated to the task of entering web forums in order to officially explain US foreign policy and counter misinformation. An assessment of the effectiveness of this initiative by Lena Katip suggests that the team struggles with a generally very hostile reception that tends to overload its capacity to respond effectively, potentially creating the impression that it actually cannot. And there's also the problem of what happens if government agents are seen to be engaging online with known terrorists. Now, governments can address some of these difficulties by attempting to mobilize their respective civil societies in order to create their own online counter-narratives. But if the government is seen to be directly involved, it risks undermining the credibility and the authority of these attempts, and risks thereby undermining the very rationale for engaging with them in the first place. Olivier Roy has pointed out in a similar context that attempts by governments to oppose the specific issue of Islamist extremism to promote good Islam through governmental means is to give the kiss of death to liberal Muslim thinkers. And this has led some writers on the subject of countering online radicalization to call for very broad-based initiatives aimed at strengthening citizenship education and civic values. It's a bit like the political education that we have in Germany. However, as worthy as such initiatives sound, the ability of such measures to have a significant impact on the dissemination of radical views, which after all in any case represent dissent from the mainstream by definition, is far from obvious. And that leads me to my rather short and rather negative conclusion. Do we really need to respond at all? Within Western countries, there has neither been an epidemic of successful mass casualty bombings, nor have there been devastating cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Even if we concern ourselves more generally with violence perpetuated by those groups against which the so-called war on terrorism has been waged, it does not seem that the production of megabytes or even gigabytes of radical data has correlated with the production of corpses. It's very cynical, I know. The Taliban today, for example, are incomparably more wired than the Viet Cong ever were. Viet Cong fought in a time before the internet. But if you take a look at the body count, the Viet Cong killed about 52,000 American soldiers. The Taliban succeeded so far in killing less than 5,000. So it might therefore make more sense if policy aimed at addressing the role of the internet in terrorism focuses on the issues as they actually are. And this could entail maintaining a modest focus on ensuring that current reticence among potential terrorists about using the internet as a means to organize is not reversed. If you take a look at jihadis, for example, they know very well that forums is all about chatter and talk, but not about action. So if you want actually to join the cause, you have to go somewhere and you have to be trained somewhere for fighting. And what we should do actually is prevent the mutual suspicion, hostility that fear of terrorism engenders as an ill in its own right. I think this would be a far more worthy option. Taking all the hot air out of the talk about radicalization internet, that would be a nice beginning. And in my opinion, and that's my last sentence, I think we shouldn't respond to these radicalization attempts on the internet or new media at all. It's simply not our job to do it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, and I hope you heard the appreciative applause from this end. We have, I think, if we stretch the injury time, about 20 minutes left. So, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the first of the two listed commentators, and I hope that people in the room will have time to come up with what will need to be short additional comments, but at least a way of getting some kind of discussion going. But I don't know, Kai, do you want? I don't know whether it's easy to.
Dear Peter, thank you very much. You'll talk. Okay. Excellent. So we'll be facing each other.
Yes, I think it's better.
Now. Hi. Nice to see you. That's so. I think, but it's my personal opinion. You made it on purpose, and you made it good. You made your point about the importance of internet, the importance of new media communication, and this Skype session was quite ingenious and quite unique in its own right. Thank you very much for your paper. I enjoyed it very, very much, and you are one of the best known experts, I would rather say, in Europe we have and we cherish what concerning terrorism, concerning issues related to terrorism. I won't repeat what you've already said and the points you've made, as you've already pointed out, could be and can be found on the paper that you kindly sent already to us. So I'll just make some points that I found particularly interesting. So first, your biggest part of the paper is about modes of coping or modes of combating terrorism on internet. You've told us that internet cannot detect terrorists from the average Joe, that encryption does not help either, that what helps is rather an old-fashioned technique of infiltration, use of brute force. I've also enjoyed very much this uselessness or pointlessness of counter-narratives in case it comes from the governmental institutions. So moreover, the possibility of them having a reverse counterproductive effect. So thus, civil society should be mobilized to create such internet sources. What I found problematic, and maybe you'd help, maybe it's a misunderstanding on my part. So giving the innocence of Muslims as the example for triggering hate, leading to an escalation of protests and terror acts of Christians against Muslims by quoting Muslim Council in Scotland, is a little, in my opinion, misleading, as we know, the effect was the other way around. The film triggered quite a few outbursts in the Muslim countries against Christians, against Western representatives. Of course, the movie is terrifying. The movie did terrify, but by its lack of good taste, poor acting, and of course, besides pointlessness. Moreover, the conclusion of comparing Vietnam War, a localized, far-from-home conflict with many military casualties on the part of Americans and casualties caused by terrorists, mainly non-combatant, civilian, global in its spread, from Russia to USA, not only 9/11, but also Amsterdam, Madrid, London, and so on and so forth, is a little bit problematic from my point of view. It leads to the conclusion and to a certain belittlement, downplaying of the enormous potential the internet has to offer the terrorist groups, networks, so convincingly analyzed by you in previous section of the paper. So this recommendation to show modest interest equals almost to the word ignore on my part, and I'm not quite sure one should ignore the ideologies of hate. So I have two questions to you. The first one regarding the press coverage and the three approaches you've pointed out. So first, laissez-faire. Second is censorship, and the third one is self-censorship, so to say. So the first two are state-oriented. The third one is press-oriented. So wouldn't you say that the first one would also, in case one adds the variable press, could be compared to the third one as well? Because in the third and in the first, when we add the variable state, it would be laissez-faire state 0.3, and the press would self-censor itself. The second question is, given the fact that due to Web 2.0, everybody who's internet savvy, as you say, has the possibility to publish literally everything and configure the internet the way he/she wants. Do you think it is appropriate to speak about someone acting as a gatekeeper anymore? Are there gatekeepers currently? Thank you very much.
Okay, good questions. Well, first of all, yes, laissez-faire and voluntary self-restraint can be the same if the press is not coming up with some good guidelines. But the problem is, as I tried to point out, it may work in a national context for quite a while, because then the press might think from the same hymn sheet out of national interest. Hard to say. It will not work if you take a look across borders. If you take a look, for example, at reporting sheer normal crime in the United Kingdom and in Germany, it's very difficult. It's very different. In Germany, you always abbreviate the family name of the evildoer. In the United Kingdom, This is already the small details where it starts falling apart. And the interests are different, in my opinion. So I don't think it works, and that brings me actually to the gatekeeper role. If you take a look at the internet and YouTube, there is no gatekeeper any longer. That's what I tried actually to point out. If you take a look at Al-Zakawi, actually, with his beheading videos, he can put the whole lot without filtering on the internet. The problem that I've not mentioned here, and that's quite crucial, is there's a lot of stuff out there. I would like to ask the audience, what are you doing actually on YouTube? Most of you are not hunting for information or news. Most of you are downloading music, video clips, Gangnam Style or whatever, which is in fashion. So you're not looking there, which means lots of the stuff that's actually putting out there to the internet is not found. And this is one of the reasons why I've mentioned the innocence of Muslims. It took the producers of this stupid video a couple of months until it was finally noticed on YouTube, and these producers needed to have like-minded people on the other side, on the extremist Muslim side, to make an issue out of that. So that it's out there in the news, in YouTube, internet also, doesn't mean that the people actually are having access to that. Where do you get your most information, your most reliable information about what's happening today? I would say that most of you are taking a look at newspapers and then taking a look at websites of your outlet of choice. For example, I read The Independent, The Guardian, and then I go take a look at BBC website, and then at the Süddeutsche Zeitung to get some local colorate what's happening in Bavaria. I don't go to YouTube. So this is one of the reasons why I think there might be no gatekeeper any longer, but there might not be an audience actually taking a look. If there's somebody going to jihadi websites, jihadi forums, that's already an individual that's converted to the cause. That's not you and me. So I would say that actually this radicalization, this internet as a tool for radicalization may be a bit overestimated. And yes, a lot of things are out there. Anarchist cookbook, for example, for many decades, how to show, it shows you how to build a bomb. Who of you have been in the army, military? You know that before you lob the first hand grenade, you read the manual. And when you actually lob the first thing, you are nervous because if you get it wrong, it can kill you. So you can learn from written sources, and that's strange for me as an academic to say only so much. If you want to be a good practitioner, you have to train someone. If you want to be a good terrorist, you have to train someone. Terrorists are not superhumans. Some of them kill each other because they get the explosives wrong. One spark and they go to heaven or to hell or whatever, and they don't accomplish anything. So I think the role of the internet is overstated, and there are actually some things we can do. Take a look at Google Street View, Google Earth. Try to find the White House in the United States. You will see there's a lot of pixelation being done so that you don't get enough information. That's what we can do. But anything else, filtering, if a law is there, it will be used. If a law is there, it will be abused. So I'm not very happy to give up my civil liberties just for 120% security against terrorism. That's not only related to internet, that's not only pressing, it's basically about making tough choices about what you want, keeping on living as a democratic person or being very secure. That's up to you to decide. But I'm just giving another lecture, so I'm sorry for that.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the paper. I enjoyed it, and I'm not that critical like Radu was. So on most topics I do agree very much. And I mean, the comparison between the Viet Cong and Taliban is not that problematic because they are very similar in a lot of aspects, as there are guerrilla warfare groups and so on. What I mostly saw as a critical point was that there is no gatekeeper in the internet, which is, in my opinion, wrong. I mean, there's a cartel of gatekeepers in the internet, like Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook and Google, the Google administration, and if you control Google, you control the internet very much because you have to know where to go, otherwise you have to Google. Or you use Yahoo, which is not that good. So, but the basic argument, you say the internet is not that not a pressing problem in promoting ideologies of hate. I totally agree. I mean, there is the saying of the internet makes the smart people smarter and the stupid people more stupid. The sense behind that, you either are committed to the cause already and you look it up, or you're not, and then it has no effect on you. Can't argue with that. And so I will just ask a short and maybe a little weird question of how governments may counter that. And that is, you said through countering narratives, which is not possible at all. How about counter-propaganda? I mean, promote, publicize, highly publicize counter-terrorist successes. Show, look, you do your thing. You try to bomb us. You can't do it. You're not good enough. You fail. Our counterintelligence is better than you. Demoralize them. I mean, good old-fashioned propaganda, which doesn't infringe on civil liberties, and it's just a provocative thing I want to put out there. I mean,
and thanks. In fact, one person has caught my eye. I don't know. Is there anyone else who wants to? So we have one questioner who will arrive shortly, and in the intervening couple of seconds, I wanted to put in my own question, which was simply, I understand what you mean in terms of where do I get my news from? And the answer is, if something happens, I want to know what's going on, I log on to the BBC or the Guardian or something like that. But if the government is going to get involved in putting out a counter-narrative, and I agree with you, it's a questionable proposition, but one argument for why it should do so is the echo chamber effect. Because the kind of people who become terrorists don't go to the BBC because they think the BBC is run by a right-wing conspiracy. So they get their news from their own websites, and what the internet has done is create a larger possibility of people only ever to talk to people they agree with, and in a sense become a collective conspiracy driving itself in a particular direction. But I'll leave that one very quickly, and if you could just briefly introduce yourself and ask the final question, and then Peter can reply.
Yes, hello, Professor. My name is Michel. I work for the East-West Institute on a regional security program that deals essentially with Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. I do have two quick comments that are related, and I would invite you for commenting on that. The first is the fact the terrorism vis-a-vis having witnesses or audience to actually take place. I'm surprised that you did not mention like the opposite side of this, that perhaps there is also a need for having audience by countries like, for example, the USA or Europe, to actually keep this kind of tire going on about the fact that there are radical Islamists and that there is fundamentalist ideology and so on. This, I would actually invite you for that, and I would link it with the second comment, which is about the actual innocence of Muslims. I mean, it's been repeated several times that it's a stupid movie and that it's mediocre and so on, but I personally think that the man is actually brilliant, and he actually managed to convey the message that maybe, in my opinion, wanted to convey. He wanted to show that, that by making a stupid movie like this, he can actually get the reaction of thousands and thousands. A side comment on that is that the actual people that actually rioted and actually caused the chaos in terms of whether killing or destruction and so on, the population compared to the actual population of the countries that they were in does not exceed the 1%. But at the same time, this is what happened in the media, and you showed what was shown was that you had thousands and thousands of Muslim fanatics that actually killed and did and so in Libya and so on. While on the other side, you see that for example, the killer of Norway, Breivik, was never termed a terrorist, but actually a killer, and that it was an incident. So I thank you very much again for the presentation and the paper, and I invite you for your comments. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the excellent provocative questions. I actually was very much hoping like this, because, well, you see, I'm a lecturer. You shouldn't take my work as a gospel. It's a workshop, and what I hope for this workshop is that everybody makes up his or her own mind about the right course of action. So to start with the last one, yes, actually I used this innocent of Muslims for a very important purpose. First of all, to show preachers of hate are not only an extremist Muslim side, there can also be Christians or Buddhists for that matter, so the religion doesn't really play a big role here. That's something we shouldn't forget. It's not only about Islam. it's about which is a paid term. Second, yes, governments play very much the same game. You have to reassure your own target audience, your allies, basically, that your cause is a worthy cause. And you can see how much efforts actually the Bush government spent to keep the coalition of the willing together for a while, which didn't work. So you can see the mechanisms are basically generally applicable on both sides. It's not only the extremists, it's not only the terrorists, it's about political actors trying to keep the audience together. So you can make this point, fair enough, I don't have any problem with that. Do we need to have a counter-narrative? I know that lots of money is spent by NATO, European Union to churn out glossy brochures. There's a lot of activities on the internet. You even have counter-terrorist hackers trying to shut down terrorist websites, forums, and all that stuff. Fair enough. But in my opinion, actions still speak louder than 1,000 words, and seeing is believing. And if you take a look at what we do in Afghanistan, for example, it's a bit like don't do as I do as I preach. We are democracies, but we are using sometimes very contentious means to win our wars on terrorism and other things. Take a look at drone strikes, for example. One drone strike that hits the wrong persons, innocents actually, makes everything undone that you tried now with setting up counter-propaganda, counter-narratives, because here's what we here there are innocents being killed by callous Western forces who declare whoever is a terrorist, who declare basically a terrorist anybody they don't like. So I think this is a problem, it's a handicap we have as states, basically. Things always go wrong. Not that we necessarily want them to go wrong, but you know there's the Clausewitz concept of fog of war. And here that's breaking news then in the end. This is what people see, and that makes everything undone that you are just writing about how good we are, how great we are. Propaganda is good, but it shouldn't go to gloating. That's a bit like, I think, Kai, you were going a bit in this direction, I think. Should we try? Should actually European Union try to get our own narrative out, our own message out? Yes, I must say I'm still flip-flopping on that. Yes, we should try to do that, but we should do it probably not with our official signatures, with our stamps and coat of arms. We should actually use our civil societies for doing that, basically. Countering the message of the terrorists with a very down-to-earth, factual approach. Okay, this is what we've done, this is what we have achieved, this is what we've pumped in your states, this is how we help you. So there you are, making up your own decision. So maybe that's kind of an approach that you should take. Because in the end, if I'm very honest, my position is a bit akin to defeatism. It's basically kind of, nah, we can't do that, nah, it won't work. So I think I'm a lecturer here, I'm an academic, I'm sitting in my ivory tower, but there are people out there who have to do something about that. And should you subscribe to my message? No, I don't think so. I think you should find a more clever way actually to develop counter-narratives. And if you take a look at this Dutch manual, actually, there are various clever ideas. So I would actually suggest you to take a look at this manual and see what's actually offered there. And you will find lots of things that will actually work that I glossed over just to make a very strong point. Because my job here is, in my opinion, trying to polarize opinions and trying to make you think on your own feet. That's basically what I try to do, and I hope I accomplish this mission.
Thank you.